Have you ever had a garment that, after washing a couple of times, the side seams twist? This is a t-shirt, and if I lie it flat, you can see that on this side, the seam curves around this way, and on the other side, it curves that way. The answer to why it does this lies in the grain line. If I look through this fabric, you can see quite clearly that the grain of the fabric runs in a different direction to the tag on the back. So this is upright, and you can see that the grain slopes to the side. Now the grain is running parallel to the camera, and you can see how the tag that appeared straight is actually now at an angle. And then once again, with the tag straight, the grain runs off to the left. This is something that you will commonly find in seconds and discounted garments. Why has it happened? Because the fabric wasn't laid straight when the pieces were cut. Here's another view of that t-shirt. I have chalked on the left here the grain line as I can see it, looking really closely and marking the threads in both directions. There are the upright threads, and you can just make out the ones that run from side to side. Now, what you would expect is that the threads should be horizontal and vertical to the wearer. This is how it should be. Over time, gravity has pulled on this garment, resulting in the threads not being at the 90-degree angle that they would have originally been at. And this is why it twists. I'm going to mention that grain line has proved particularly important for me when I cut out garments from repurposed fabrics, where you don't have that factory edge, the selvage edge. So what is grain line, why does it matter, and how do you work it out? I hope to be able to explain that to you. When you buy fabric from the store, it will come with a lovely edge that won't fray and is completely solid, and that is called the selvage edge. We're now going to shift our focus to this weaving loom, which was mine as a child, and though I've never made anything worth bragging about on it, it can provide some critical insight. This is a very, very bad example of weaving that I started after being reunited with the loom after some 20 years. When you set up a loom, which is what is used when making fabrics, just on an enormous scale compared to this, the first thing you have to do is to warp the machine. You set up a bunch of threads in a direction running away from you, which go the entire length of the fabric, and these threads are called the warp threads. You then prepare shuttles, which are going to pass from side to side to form the cross grains, and these threads are called the weft threads. The edge that gets looped over as you pass the shuttles from side to side, that solid edge, is called your selvage. In this example, one thread goes up and the next one goes down, and that repeats across the entire width. The shuttle passes through the gap between the up thread and the down thread. There are some differences. In some fabrics you might get a 2 up, 2 down, or maybe even a 1 up, 2 down, and so on. This nifty contraption here holds every other string in place while its neighbor is able to move up and down, so you can change which threads are at the top and which threads are at the bottom. Here, for example, I am pulling this shuttle across, and as it pulls across, the thread follows. If I push down, the thread that was at the bottom can slide up to be at the top. If I put the shuttle back through, it will go over top of what was underneath and underneath of what was over top. And that's how the basic mesh that is fabric is formed. Now, as you can imagine, the warp threads are under a fair amount of tension. With the weft threads, if you pull them too tightly, you'll end up with exactly what I have here, which is effectively a strangulation on the fabric. It's squeezed the sides in. So generally, the sideways weft threads are going to be a lot less tight than the warp threads. Now to recap, these are the warp threads that are strung when first setting up the loom, through which the shuttles pass. And then we have the weft threads, which are the sideways shuttle threads. The warp threads are under more tension, the weft threads are under less tension. Now there is a third direction that is commonly referred to in fabrics, and that is the bias. The bias is simply the diagonal that cuts across the warp and weft threads. Because there are no threads running in that direction, there is the least amount of tension and the most amount of stretchiness. How does that relate to a cut of fabric? This is a cut-off from a sheet. There is no selvage edge. I can slip the threads off of the edges. Now, immediately being able to do that, you can establish your two primary warp and weft thread directions. Sometimes, though, the threads are either so fine or so old that they more or less disintegrate when you're trying to pull on them to establish that line, and this makes things a bit more tricky. It can be a real pain to establish the direction. But if we look at this corner, you can clearly see how there are threads going in this direction and threads running across this direction. But the next question is, which is the warp and which is the weft? For the most part, you should be able to work it out by pulling on the fabric. If I pull this, it's got a little bit of give, but it's resisting quite a lot. If I do the same sideways, it feels like there's a lot more give. It's certainly not a fail-proof way of verifying the two directions, but I have been able to identify a clear difference in most fabrics that I've needed to examine in this way. And just to show how stretchy the bias is, if I pull on the diagonal, you can see how much it moves because there are no threads reinforcing it. Based on my stretchiness observations, how strong it feels this way and how it has a bit of give this way by comparison, I would conclude that this is the warp direction and this is the weft direction. Now, why does that matter? You've got the grain line, what else do you need? Because of the slight give and the way that clothes hang both on us and when hanging in the wardrobe, the general recommendation is that the less stretchy warp thread should run in a floor-to-ceiling direction. Where grain line is indicated, it is the warp thread that should be aligned. It's certainly not set in stone, but it is the standard practice. You most definitely do not want to be plonking down your pattern pieces any which way. As you can imagine, if you sew a straight line with regular tension on a bias grain, your stitch line is going to be under a lot more tension than the surrounding fabric, which can stretch. Your seam line, therefore, runs a risk of breaking. The most fascinating application of grain line I've found has been in corsetry. You can see how the manipulation of grain line enables the corset to be better shaped to the body. Bias grains curving over the curves of the bust and hip, and straight grains reinforcing the waist. But here's another example of grain line gone wrong. The dress I'm wearing in the intro started really annoying me after wearing it for a little while. Why? Because it wasn't cut correctly at the factory. I noticed that the split in the back was running along my left leg and not between my legs. I could feel my left leg poking through the split when I walked. And I could see looking down that the seam on the left was more forward than the seam on the right. Furthermore, I could feel the seam down the center back crossing very noticeably over one side of my derriere. I removed it after taking the photo and sadly will never wear it again. It was a used garment given to me, so I don't feel guilty of falling prey to fast fashion mistakes. Instead, it will be reused as a play dress for my 10-year-old, who, dare I say, is nearly as tall as I am. I hope this little exploration of grain line and its importance is of benefit to you, either in your own sewing projects or as you understand why the odd garment you own twists in a particular direction. I always treasure your messages, so please do let me know if this video has been useful or if you have any questions. I don't profess to know it all, but I will most certainly do whatever I can to help.